Welcome, low ego action heroes. Look who I have here. We're coming to you from Zoom today, so I apologize that the setup is a little bit different. Hopefully, everybody can hear me. I know there might be a little bit of delay with my voice on the video because it's going through Zoom first. But welcome to episode 161. Hey, Manuel. Manuel says, hello, Debbie and Michelle. Really excited about this session. Welcome to episode 161, Research Job Interviews. And of course, before we have Michelle introduce herself, even though I know you're all fans already, just a quick thanks to everybody who is donating to the channel through the YouTube Join Tertiary CTA. Always hard to find. Thanks to everybody who's giving $3 to $10 per month to keep me in streaming software and in delicious chocolate chips, which I ate today for sure. Ralitza says, hello, Debbie and Michelle. Courtney says, I am excited. Thanks for doing this. So, Michelle, you're already on camera. People can hear you. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michele Ronsen. I'm in San Francisco. I am a designer, a researcher, and an educator, and the founder of Curiosity Tank and the Ask Like a Pro program. Nice to see you guys.
Cool. And Michelle, you're 1L, right? I want to make sure I spelled you correctly on the screen.
I am a 1L Michelle. That is true.
There we go. So if you want to find Michelle online, Michele, last name Ronsen. And Michelle, before we jump into some of our topic today, I want to remind everybody, because this is totally not sponsored. You don't pay me anything for this, but I do tend to recommend your Curiosity Tank courses. So maybe you can tell people about those and what's coming up next.
Sure. So Curiosity Tank Ask Like a Pro courses are a series of 6 user research workshops that follow the exact sequence in which we conduct research in the real world. And there's 3 ways to participate. You can participate as an on-demand student and access the materials right away. You can participate as an observer along with a live cohort and participate in the live classes, weekly check-ins. You get some accountability there, or as an all-in. And all-ins go all in, and they're actually working on a sponsored project with a stakeholder, and I guide and mentor them at every step of the way. The all-ins leave the experience with the materials for a case study and terrific experience to talk about in their job interviews, etc. We have 2 great sponsors for this upcoming cohort. The next cohort starts September 19th. And on Tuesday, we are having an Is Asked Like a Pro Right for Me session on Zoom with a whole bunch of former alumni. The entire program is over 45 hours of training, and it includes my signature templates for every single step in the process.
Super. And we're going to, after the show ends, I'll add those into the YouTube description. So you can check on back, reload the page, and have a look there. And of course, we welcome questions from the live chat. I'm monitoring LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. So send questions. I'm going to ask Michelle some of mine, but I want to hear yours too, and we'll fire them at her. Michelle, I get a lot of questions, which is why we dragged you back here, about what job interviews are like for UX researchers. And there's probably a difference between what a job interview might be asking for a newbie who's maybe looking for their first job versus somebody who's had more corporate experience. Can you give us some insights or ideas into what types of questions do hiring managers tend to ask?
So I think it's also going to be dependent on what kind of role is it. Is this a role in research ops, or is this a role as a practitioner, a research practitioner? Is this role in-house, like at an agency, or is this role embedded, and things like that? So I think that there's a lot of nuances there. For an incoming researcher, whether it's a new or aspiring researcher or someone looking to upskill, I think most of the questions are probably going to focus on how you think. And these questions are going to be posed in terms of scenarios. What would you do if, or imagine when, and have you ever had an experience similar to, how would you handle X? What would you do in case of Y, and things like that. The interviewer is typically for those questions, those are people that will typically be the hiring manager or somewhere on the research team. The initial recruit screening probably won't get to that level.
Okay, and then things are also, I want to remind everybody if you want to check out episode 129 on the YouTube channel. So just check out, go to YouTube, write Delta CX 129. We had Julia DeBari on talking about questions you can ask during job interviews to make sure that it's the right environment for you. Michele, maybe, I know you haven't seen that episode, but what can you add? What are some questions you advise people to ask during job interviews, to ask back to the interviewer?
I put together a whole list of resources, and there's actually a couple of resources on this particular question specifically. Um, Interviewing is a two-way street. I really suggest that you do come with questions. You come with questions about the company, you come with questions about the culture. And then I also like to ask, and I do this with consulting clients too, what do you wish you knew? What keeps you up at night? What research questions do you have now? What questions, or what would you like to learn in 6 months? Where is this going? What would be helpful? What do you feel not as confident in, that you would like to feel more confident in order to make product and business decisions? I also like to find out what the culture is like in terms of research, and ask questions to uncover their UX maturity. I think that will be really, really helpful. If you're the first researcher, your questions will probably be very different than if you're a researcher that's moving into an existing practice, where research is already understood and already has processes. But I'd like to know, like, what are you doing today? What's working well, what doesn't? How does research work with product? What's working well there, what isn't? What types of research questions are being explored now? What types of research questions are coming up? What happens with that research? Is it stored? Is it archived? Who stores it? Who archives it? Who accesses it? What does a typical stakeholder engagement look like? Who are the stakeholders? How excited or not are they about research? What's the feeling about research in the organization, and things like that.
Cool. Before we ask you first question, I'm going to jump on Kayleen's comment and question. Kayleen says, I haven't really gotten how do you think questions for some reason, mostly just tell me about your past experience, which is tough because I have some, but not a ton, and I'm only just now learning to present my past experiences confidently.
The how do you think questions won't sound like that. They won't say, how do you think? They'll typically be more on the lines of a scenario. Something like, imagine a stakeholder came to you, and you learn that they're launching something next week, and no research has been done. It's a feature that's been requested by customers for the last 6 months. The design team was able to fast track it because something, fell off. Um, uh, what, if anything, can we do to find out if this is going to meet our customers' needs or expectations in 1 week? Something like that.
Right. That because that's a real life scenario. So they're asking, what would you do? And what I find sometimes in my Tuesday shows where I hold office hours and ask me anything, and people will say, oh, I got this question in my job interview. How should I answer it? And I typically don't answer those questions in my office hours because you should be able to answer that. It shouldn't be me feeding you the right in quotes thing to say. I might feed you the wrong thing to say. So I just want to advise people, like Michele is not going to give you a script of exactly what to say to people for in these interview scenarios.
maybe it would be good to actually pick apart that example. So if I was asked that question in an interview, I'd have several follow-up questions and want to know what type of feature is this? What type of customers is this being targeted towards, this segment? Um, Hopefully, I would have some sense of, again, if I'm already a researcher at this company, I'd have some sense of how easy are these people to recruit. Hopefully I will have already built a participant pool, so I have kind of a warm uh, candidates or participants on hand that I could reach out to. But I'd also want to know, what specifically are we looking to learn and at what level of confidence, right? What are we looking to learn? How will the learnings be applied and at what level? In this particular situation, how will the learnings be applied is really important, because if we've already had a launch date, we're launching in 7 days, like what really can we adjust? Or are we willing to maybe push back that launch date to address some of the learnings that come up? So those would be some of the questions that I would want to have a better understanding about before I made any sort of recommendation.
Yeah, thanks for that. And yeah, Solomon, Solomon, I've got that question on my list. Larry's asked a question. We're going to go back to Yuver's question first, but I wanted to say quickly that I have heard in some cases that in some cases the hiring manager is just checking if you ask follow-up questions. If you ask decent, well thought out follow up questions, or do you just take what they give you and go, oh, yeah, I'd run a tree test?
This is a terrific example of questions that help me understand how you think. So there's no scenario in which that question, we're launching in 7 days. What can you do to help us? Um, there's no scenario in which that should be followed up with a response. You don't have enough information at this point in order to make an informed recommendation, right? So, what are we looking to learn? How will the learnings be applied? Do we have easy access to the right people? What level of confidence are we looking for? And seriously, what, if anything, can we do with the learnings before the launch, or is the team willing to, maybe delay the launch depending upon the feedback?
Yeah, and I want to get to Yuver's question, and then there's a couple of other questions waiting. And I also want to remind everybody that Michelle's going to be back in a few weeks, and we're going to be talking about the importance of recruiting. So make sure you are checking our live show calendar, available at deltacx.com/links, and mark it off so that you can be here live and ask your questions live. Yuver said, "Hey, Debbie and Michelle, I have a question regarding what would a UXR interview look like for someone who's been working as a team of one and is now going into a larger team? Any differences in the interviews for these positions? Team of one versus larger team?"
Um, Coming from a team of one has some benefits. Coming from an established team also has some benefits. I think if I was interviewing you and you were a team of one now, and I was bringing you into an existing um, team, I would want to know how you might want to collaborate with the other researchers, what your expertise really is in, and how you might be able to supplement either some other researchers or help, partner with other researchers, and what your superpowers are, and how flexible you might be with new processes and procedures. Um, if you will be comfortable working in one domain or on one area of the product. Usually teams, larger research teams that have multiple researchers, those researchers are aligned to a specific line of business or product or feature. How do you feel about that? Do you have, a preference whether we work on, or this segment or that segment? Basically, like, how well do you play with others? Um, how flexible, can you be? We have a different tool set. We have a different tool stack. We do things this way or that way. And then on the flip side, I'd also love to hear like what's worked well for you. Um, what did you like about being a solo researcher? What did you learn from being a solo researcher or with your tools or your segments or working with your stakeholders that, we can leverage and we can learn from too?
Yeah, it reminds me of an interview earlier this year when I was working at a different company and we were interviewing for senior UX researchers. And someone came in and they said, "Oh, well, everywhere I've worked, I've been the team of one. I've been the researcher and the designer." And we said, "Well, at this company, we separate researchers and designers. The researchers research, the designers design." And she was like, "Oh, no, I don't like that. I want to design after I research." And so we ended up rejecting her because we thought that she wasn't going to be happy in our environment. So I think that people should also remember that if you are asked if you have a preference or if they do mention, this is how we work, that's your chance to be honest with yourself and them. Is that an environment in which you're comfortable? Or is it something you just don't feel interested in? And that's a good check-in moment.
Yeah, I'd say even making a list of what your must-haves are and getting them down on paper before you start applying to jobs will really help you target your search and be more efficient and productive in your search process. So what's most important to you? What values in this new organization or in the new job? What are non-negotiables? Do you absolutely want to conduct research with kids? Do you want to work for a mission-based organization or a nonprofit? Maybe life work balance is the most important to you, or working with an established team where you can have a mentor. Is rolling research okay? Is just evaluative research okay? What level of UX
Great
maturity is
questions.
important? Really think through what aligns with your vision, and you should be able to at least figure out whether those core fundamentals in job A versus job B or job C are in alignment with your must-have criteria. I also think that having some nice-to-have criteria is important too, things that you're willing to be flexible on. um, but having this written out so that you can evaluate whether this is a job or a company, or a role that you're even interested in, where does it sit with your must-have criteria and your nice-to-have criteria?
Yeah, fantastic. I love that answer. I'm going to jump to Larry Marine's question. You may have heard of Larry Marine. He knows a couple of things about research, and Larry struggles with something that I do, and I'm sure some other more senior researchers do. He says, "I typically know so much more than and think very differently from the typical interviewer. They tend to not understand and then therefore discount my approaches. Any suggestions on how I deal with this issue?"
um, Hi, Larry. um, I use the first, I would suggest using the first, 5 or 10 minutes of the interview, and even speaking with the recruiter beforehand to find out who you will be speaking with, and then do your research, on that person, similar to a stakeholder kickoff call. You want to understand like who are you speaking with, what is their background, what is their relationship to research, so that you can get into the mindset. I mean, a big part of my role, not only with Curiosity Tank and leading corporate workshops, is to educate people. I educate my clients all the time, and the way I'm doing that is not like in a teachy preachy kind of way, but I'm very cognizant to explain, this is how we might approach that, but I welcome your opinion, or this would be my recommendation based on what I understand to be one, two, three. Please correct me if I have misunderstood, but I'm looking to both share my thinking and check for confirmation along the way, but make sure that I'm bringing them along with me.
This reminds me, Larry, of the show we did earlier with Leon Dries about telling your story during interviews. And I think that ultimately, Larry, for someone like you, in addition to what Michele said, you've just got to focus on impact, because you have so many stories of being able to make a significant difference in what a company was doing or how they approached their product or things like that. I think you just have to focus more on the impact you've been able to make, and maybe not focus too much in some of what your methods are, unless you find that your methods are super at odds with these people. Like Larry's not going to go in somewhere where it's rolling research or innovation sprint kind of places, and that's where you have to have that self-assessment. Let me jump over to Udipta's question, and he asks, would you say the magic wand question would be good to ask during job interviews? Like, if you had a magic wand, what would you change about your current ways of working?
I like that theoretically. I probably wouldn't phrase it like that. The questions that I asked earlier are intended to uncover just that answer. What do you wish you knew? What are you working on now? What keeps you up at night? Those are getting at that same response. In terms the reason why I am not so sure a magic wand question would be successful is there are so many things in a large organization that are completely outside the control of any one individual. So if someone said, I wish we had more, I wish we had a research ops team to help with recruiting, like that's not very actionable by you. And so I would try to frame the questions in terms of what's going to be actionable, what's going to tell me more about the organization. I mean, it could give you a jumping off point, like, so research ops is a struggle here, but it would be hard to tell from that response or that specific question. Is it because that individual person doesn't enjoy that aspect of the process, or is it really a problem? If that
Yeah,
makes
that's a
sense.
very fair answer. Thanks for that. So I'm going to jump on Solomon's question, which I had already written down. So he's a mind reader today. And I'm sure we'll cover this again when we talk about recruiting. But the audience would like to know more about what level of confidence means.
Sure. So, in a more UX mature organization, we're typically conducting research on an ongoing basis, whether it's there's a rolling research program, whether it's iterative research, but we're conducting research throughout the entire product development cycle. So, we're going to start off with some generative research when we're looking to generate a better understanding of the problem space, the severity, the opportunity space, the people that we're designing for. We're going to gather some feedback on some initial concepts that might be really low fidelity, like in a thumbnail sketch version. And we're going to continue along that path as the product development takes shape all the way through and past launch. So when we're talking about confidence, let's think about it in terms of a spectrum. Are we looking for like a simple smoke signal to let us know that we're going in the right direction, or are we looking to, maybe change the primary navigation on the homepage, for a massive financial institution in terms of where people access their bank balances? So different levels of confidence are going to be desired at different points in the process. So, again, what are you looking to learn? How will the learnings be applied? Another question there is, what do we already know, or what do we think we know? And what do we need to know in order to make this decision?
Yeah, if I can add to that, level of confidence is sometimes a term used on the quant and statistics side when you are working on getting a statistically significant population for your study. You want to look at your level of confidence and your margin of error, because that calculated against your total population will tell you how many people will have to take your survey or be in your observational study. Well, not be in your observational study. We have separate numbers for that, but some things like quant studies, like surveys, your level of confidence, which is how confident you are that the population you've selected is representative of the greater population and your margin of error, and then you can calculate that. SurveyMonkey has a cool calculator for that, so good one to know. Larry is telling stories in the chat. He is saying more than one interviewer has said that my success story seemed inflated and not real. Even though there's published data to support my success, now I scale back my impacts. Sigh. Yeah, Larry, that's sad. I don't know how to help you tell your story if they're not going to believe your story. It reminds me a little bit of that 1-star review my book got on Amazon because someone gave me 1 star on Amazon because they didn't believe my bio. And then they didn't read the book. But they gave my book 1 star and they wrote that my bio was fake. So, I don't know what to do about that other than laugh. Let me move on to Kayleen's question. Since she has a good general question, it is, can you think of any other common mistakes that researchers make in interviews?
Not asking questions, I think, is a pretty big one. Interviewing for roles or at organizations where you're not interested in the product or the mission or the focus, I think is another one. I'm all for getting interview practice, but not at the not in exchange for wasting someone's time. When you are interviewing, I think it's really, really important, especially in a research role, to demonstrate you have done your research on this company, you have done your research on this organization, you understand where they've been, you're genuinely interested in where they're going, you have some sort of connection to the audience or the product or their values. Demonstrate and discuss the aspects of what is attracting you to this role, and specifically, if possible, what transferable skills do you have? Last night we held an alumni mixer for Ask Like a Pro alums and the incoming September cohort. And I had 3 alumni who transitioned from academia into industry. And they talked specifically about their transition. One of the alums, named Kay, did her undergrad work in cognitive psychology with children. So when she was looking for a job in industry, it was really important to her that she was able to continue her work with children. And she really wanted to work on a product or a service that would allow her to leverage these skills and work in this area. And she narrowed her job search focus to ed tech products for children. So I think it's really important, to think about what you value, think about what's important to you, and identify what transferable skills you have, because that will also help you stand out amongst the other candidates.
Yeah,
In
thanks.
terms of business impact, go ahead, sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I was going to go to the next question, but please continue.
In terms of impact, I think it's really important to think about impact from 360 degrees when you're presenting your case studies or talking about your own experience. There's actual business impact and where you may have influenced the product. And by the way, it's just as important if your research led to the decision to not implement XYZ, by the way. It doesn't always have to be that it was launched, right? Having the impact to help the business or the organization make the decision not to move forward is equally, if not more, important. But think about impact in other ways too. Think about cultural impact. Think about industry impact. Think about stakeholder impact. And those are also just as important to me to understand you as a complete person and what it's like to work with you. And again, it helps me understand how you think.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in. One key mistake that I have found in interviewing is people who don't answer the question directly. This is not as deep as what Michelle just said, but I've had a few instances where I've said to somebody, hey, tell me your typical process, or tell me about a process you prefer to use for a certain type of thing. And I get very fluffy, bizarre answers. This is sometimes from people who might not be job ready, so I'm not saying this is all of you. But I remember earlier this year in the same round of interviews, I interviewed someone and I said, what's your preferred research process? That's a very broad question, and there might not even be a wrong answer, but I just wanted to see what they would say and how they think. And the guy starts going, research is so important. Research is really important. Oh, I love research. And he kind of never answered the question. And I feel, if I ask you what your process is, I expect to hear some sort of process. Even if it's not my favorite process, just tell me anything. Hey, I love, design thinking, and here's how I add research to it. Cool, tell me more. So be careful, listen closely, stop and take a breath. Make sure you've heard the question. If you're not sure what they're asking, ask for clarification. But if someone asks what's your process or approach or preference, make sure you've told them a process, approach, or preference.
Listening is so important. It's not only important in the job interview process, but it is a core skill to succeed as a researcher. So that would be a pretty big red flag for me if you weren't actually listening to the question. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to ask Solomon's question, because now Larry's asking a question and they're nearly the same question. So I'm just going to read you what Solomon said and what Larry said, and I think together they're kind of one big question. Solomon said, what are some major red flags, according to you, from an organization that claims to follow proper research processes? It's hard to tell when people lie, because I messed up and I ended up with a company that, despite what was said in the interview, does design sprints, everything by workshop, lean UX. How do I keep this from happening again? And Larry said, how do you suggest we ask about the company culture to avoid rose-colored glasses that the interviewer is looking through? I think these are kind of the same questions, though one is rose-colored glasses and one sounds like possibly deliberate lying.
Well, I mean, a lot of these are the same skills that a researcher needs to apply, during a study. So I'd ask yourself, what are you looking to learn? Are you really looking to learn about what methods they use and how often they use them? Then I would ask that. If you're looking to learn about who the researchers associate with and collaborate with today, I would ask that. And I would ask how that collaboration takes place, where it takes place, how frequently it takes place. And I would ask for specific examples. And asking about a previous example will always shed more light and be more accurate versus a hypothetical example. So, for example, can you tell me about the last research project you worked on? Who was your stakeholder, and how did you guys interact? Right, and then that's the jumping off point of that conversation. And then a follow-up question might be, is that how you typically collaborate with your stakeholders? What worked particularly well and what didn't? In hindsight, what could have been better, or how could that be improved in the future? And what is the appetite to do that? So applying that same researcher mindset in your job interview question process helps me understand how you think. And again, I want to understand how you think. Research is a thinking process. It's an evolving craft. It's a completely dynamic industry. And having that growth mindset and demonstrating that growth mindset to me is really paramount, um, in order for me to consider, having you on my team or wanting to partner with you or collaborate with you, on my team.
Yes.
In
Now,
terms of the
please.
rose-colored
Oh, sorry. I was
glasses,
just going to say, please don't coin the term research thinking. We don't need that. Okay, back to you. Sorry.
no, 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 like how you think, like what is your approach to discovering things, should come across in your interview questions too. And I would think, like a researcher, maybe it would be helpful to create a little discussion guide for yourself in terms of, understanding, what you want to understand about the research organization. Maybe there, you create some sections, tell me about how you're organized. Where does research sit? Um, is this a new, um, is this a new product org, or has it always sat there? How has it evolved over time? What works well, what doesn't? It kind of go through and organize your thinking so that you can drill down.
Yeah, and I wonder if do you think we can ask anything like future growth plans? I know it's hard with the pandemic and with the sudden economic wackiness where people have had layoffs, but um, is that an okay question to ask? Because maybe growth of the department is some sort of positive signal.
Yeah, I think it's a fine question to ask. I'd be, careful who you ask the question or who you pose the question to. Um, Staff researcher might not be privy to that information. So and the even the research manager might not, have a good sense. Um, Certainly, if you're the first researcher, it can't hurt to ask. Maybe a nice way to ask that would be, um, have there been discussions about the future of the research organization? I'm curious to see, what, if anything, might be on the table, in terms of a 3 to 5 year plan or something like that.
Great, thanks. And I just want to remind everybody, wow, thank you for joining us live. We've got about 20 more minutes. Ask your questions. We've got one from Larry waiting to go. Remember, you can join our free Slack and Discord communities. We'll join one, join both at deltacx.com/links. No charge. And you can also see our calendar of events there. Lots of stuff coming up, especially our October Concentric conference. So take a look at deltacx.com/concentric and check that out and make sure you are registered, and of course subscribe here. We're coming up on 6,000 subscribers, so please do subscribe on the YouTube channel at Delta CX. Larry says thinking. Very good, Larry. Keep thinking about that. And what else was I going to say? That might be it. And then I was going to circle back to Larry's question, which is, can you talk about how important it is to follow your gut and walk away from organizations that don't fit your style of research?
Oh, 100%. I think that ties really closely into the previous discussions we've had about what are the most important values about a job or an organization to you. Is it working with, a specific segment of, people that you're designing for? Is it more about the mission or the organizational values? Is it about, um, research rigor or approach? Is it about, um, working with a UX mature team that has established processes and procedures where you might have a mentor? Um, if it doesn't fit and doesn't feel good, if your spidey senses go up, dig into that. Dig into that. Remember, as a researcher, your job isn't to have the right answers. Your job is to know the right questions to ask. So if something doesn't feel right, I would ask about it. I wouldn't say, I'd like to ask about this suite of questions that doesn't feel right. I would, again, as a researcher, you should be presenting questions in a very neutral way. You may say something like, I'd love to learn more about um, the rigor in the current research approach today. Would you please tell me more about that? Or how you manage PII, or um, what's working well and what's not about X. But again, your job as the researcher is not to have the right answers. It's to know the right questions to ask.
Love it. Yes, I'm going to run the round of applause background sound. Thank you. Um, I wrote down a question because this is one that we get a lot on the Tuesday office hours Ask Me Anything shows, and that is people are so excited to finally find their first job. They got that job offered, they took it, they went full steam ahead. They didn't necessarily have standards. They were just like, oh my God, first UX job, got to get that on my resume or CV. And then they find out that they're not being coached, they're not being mentored. Nobody's looking at their work. They don't know if they're doing good work or not. They don't know if they're making mistakes. And they usually are surprised by this. They're usually like, hey, don't they understand that I'm junior? Don't they understand that I need this? Michele, can you speak a little bit to some of the questions that especially our newbies looking for their first job might want to ask during interviews to make sure that an environment has the support or mentoring or coaching that they expect?
Yeah, and if that is one of your, the core things you're looking for, I wouldn't pick more than three or four core things. But I would ask specifically about that in the interview process. And I would say, very directly, I'm new. I'm looking to grow my skills and grow in the industry and, really contribute in meaningful ways. What, if any, sort of mentorship or buddy system or partnership is available for me as I begin this journey with you? And ask directly.
Yeah, I think that's the key. You've got to ask directly. You don't want to be surprised later that they're not supporting you. Dylan, good to see you. Dylan says, where does a UX researcher fit into the scientist practitioner spectrum? I'd assume more on the scientist side, but a bit more centered than an academic researcher. Thoughts on science and being a practitioner?
I think it's going to depend on the UX maturity and the size of the team. With a more established team of researchers, it's likely going to be organized into data science, qualitative research, and quantitative research. And the researchers are going to be dedicated to each of those practices. On a smaller team, analytics might sit in a completely different area, and quant might be done. It might sit in all different areas. It might not even sit underneath the product or design umbrella. So I think this is really org specific.
Yeah, and I tend to think of research as being rather scientific, even though I think of researchers as practitioners. I think how scientific you are is about level of experience and your background. I find the people coming from the academic and PhD backgrounds are super scientific, and other people are still getting there. Dylan says, folks asking for mixed methods, are they usually smaller companies?
No, not necessarily. This ties to our conversation about confidence earlier. So, my initial response was about confidence in qualitative research. And Debbie elaborated on confidence in quantitative research. So, again, the larger the team, the more likely this is. You're going to have dedicated researchers with specific expertise in each of those approaches. But no, I would also ask specifically what a mixed method researcher means to the person asking you the question to make sure that you understand. Whenever there's any sort of subjectivity or language that may have room for some interpretation, I would ask for clarification, which is actually a great segue into learning the lingo. I can tell
Excuse me.
immediately how savvy someone is by the language they use in regards to our UX terminology or and research terminology, market research terminology, for sure.
Good point. And Kayleen was just commenting, sadly, many open roles I see are mid-level, and you're going to be the first and only UX researcher in the company. Ah.
Well, I mean, that might not fit your values or what you're looking for, but that might be perfect for someone else. That might be perfect. Um, again, what is important to you? What values and what objectives are you trying to achieve in your next role, and where? Identifying those up front, are really critical to having an efficient and effective job search strategy.
Yeah, thanks. I'm a little bit fresh out of questions. Let's talk a little bit about portfolios. Okay, I've got questions. They just came into my head. We've talked about interviews. Let's talk a little bit about we've done a show on portfolios already. So people can just go to YouTube and write Delta CX portfolios. You'll see all kinds of videos. But let's talk a little bit about the portfolio presentation during that interview. Do you have a sense, or can you give people an idea of what they might have to present, how long they might be given, what they should focus on?
Yes, there's a little bit of background noise. When let me turn that off.
Okay. Hey, it's me. We could turn this into karaoke. Let me just mention my favorite band is re-releasing their album from 2000. If you'd like to go throw your money at Areon, Ayeon, they're re-releasing Universal Migrator Volumes 1 and 2. I'm going to throw my money at that. Not sponsored. Go buy a cool prog goth album, prog symphonic rock metal. Okay, sorry, I was just plugging my favorite band is re-releasing an album because you turned off. Okay, back, Michele. Portfolio and case studies during interviews. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's really important. It's important because such a large part of a researcher's role is sharing learnings and presenting. And the case study and the portfolio help me understand how you organize your thinking, how you communicate in a literal and visual way, and how concise you may be able to relate a previous experience. And also tell me about yourself. So to me, it's critical. It's also the way that you will most likely communicate to your future stakeholders. So I want to know how comfortable you are presenting. I'm far more interested in the impact that you had and the stories that you are telling than the details of the project, right? So I feel a lot of questions about, well, I work for a company and I signed an NDA, so I can't really talk about X, Y, or Z. I'm not interested in X, Y, or Z. What I'm interested in far more is how you think, right? What was one aspect of this project that was particularly difficult, and how did you overcome it? How did you work with your stakeholders? How did you collaborate? What happened as a result? I don't care about X numbers of lift or Y, numbers of conversion, unless that was the business impact that happened over time. But the reality is lots of other decisions and contributors went into that end result, right? I want to hear about you. I want to see you. I want to hear you. I want to see how you present information. I want to see how efficient and effective you can be within maybe 5 minutes, right? Within 15 minutes, right? Oftentimes, you're only going to have 30 minutes to present an entire study's learning, get feedback and buy in, and answer questions as well as determine next steps. So, can you do this efficiently and effectively?
Yeah, and Sarita is writing, I think this is the first time I've heard, I want to know how you present because this is most likely how you will speak to the stakeholders. And I super agree with Michele. I always tell people your portfolio and your presentation of your portfolio is a hiring manager's first glimpse of what it might look like for you to run a meeting or give a presentation on how a research project went. And so they're getting a preview of what you're going to be like at work presenting. And so I do think that people need to work on those presentation skills.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay,
It's
we
a,
still, oh, sorry, go ahead.
it's a great way for you to demonstrate your storytelling skills.
Right, you're living it. Right now, you have to tell me a story. And how that goes could make or break if you make it to the next round.
Yep. I would also identify ahead of time what your stories are. This is a story about me overcoming a difficult situation. This is a story about me building stakeholders' trust. This is a story about some different aspect of my research skill set. This is a story of me learning how to do something new. This is a story about lessons learned that I will carry forward into future studies.
Yeah, and I think one mistake that I sometimes see, especially from some of the newer people who haven't built up that much experience yet, is they tend to think that the presentation is about themselves and how they personally grew as a person. And I think sometimes the research gets a little bit lost. Like, I learned it's really important to run a survey, or I learned that I really like doing research. And I tend to feel like those things shouldn't be included. So that's really divided. Some boot camps and sources say, "Oh yeah, put in something about your own personal learning and growth." But I feel like if I'm imagining you reporting to a stakeholder, I don't want to hear about your personal growth. Michele, where do you stand on presentations that have some sort of self-reflection about personal growth?
Um, if it's small, I like it because again, I'm looking for you to demonstrate your growth mindset. I'm looking for various indicators that you understand the industry is evolving over time and you're not only willing to evolve with it, but you've demonstrated your commitment to continuous learning. Um, that growth mindset is super important to me. And if the learning was about over recruiting for your future study and I'm going to benefit as the hiring manager from that learning, I do want to understand that your skills need to evolve. There's nothing static about our industry, about our competition, about the world. And to me, that learning ties to the core function of the job. So I like that.
Oh, okay, there you go. Then maybe that works, and I'm the weirdo. So listen to Michele on that one. Um,
I don't. I think different strokes for different folks. But to me, that's going to tell me something about your humility also. That you're open to sharing, something that maybe you made a mistake on, or maybe you learned during the process. Um, but you're comfortable enough, to talk about that as well. And hopefully, as the hiring manager, I'm going to gain from that experience. But it also shows me that you're teachable. It shows me that you're, is learnable a word?
Coachable.
Coachable.
Yeah, Ralitza made a great point about these things, and she said, Presentation skills are about tailoring the level of detail to the audience. I would try to be as brief as possible with senior people.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's probably a best practice to have three versions of your story or whatever you're presenting. You have the elevator pitch, and you have the 5 to 15 minute version, and then you have the 20-minute, 25-minute version. And when you're going through the process, be very clear in terms of how much time do I have to present. And oftentimes they'll tell you you'll have 15 minutes to present and 15 minutes for Q&A, or be prepared to go over 3 case studies in 30 minutes and then we will have a Q&A. But asking those questions is really what's going to set you up for success. But definitely have different versions where you have the small, the medium, and the large. It's kind of like the Goldilocks effect.
I like that. Thanks. Let's see. We have time for at least one more question. Purvi says, when given a UX challenge during the hiring process, how deep should one go into the project? Is it okay to ask questions about the challenge back to the hiring team?
That's a great series of questions, and I think that's going to be team dependent or challenge specific. Some teams it's totally okay. Other teams it's not. Here's the challenge. Go off and respond to it without any other input. Or some teams are going to say you have 48 hours to ask questions. Other teams might say we're here to ask questions throughout, but we don't want you to spend more than 5 hours or something on the assignment. So if you have the opportunity to ask questions, I would ask as many clarifying questions as you can, but stick within the guardrails that they have set up.
Thanks. Lorena says, I'm just starting in UX and I'm having a hard time building my portfolio's landing or homepage. I don't know what information to add there. We do have episode 148, which is some of my suggestions of what I expect to see in a portfolio. Michele might have a different take on that, but do check out on YouTube. Just type Delta CX 148. It should pop right up and you can see some of my suggestions there. Michele, anything you suggest for maybe the homepage to punch people in the face with your greatness?
I would be very clear on what your skill sets are. If you're looking for a purely research job, I would state that something to that effect very explicitly. If you're looking for a hybrid research design job, be very specific about that. If you're focused just on design, be specific about that. And then something that's going to be unique and stand out among the masses. Remember, this is just one of maybe 50 or 60 I might look at. So as clean to the point, and straightforward as possible. If I want to read, I'm going to be reading a case study or an about you page. And that's a place where you can plug in some more information. I'll give you an example. Last week I posted something on LinkedIn about my daughter rock climbing and how rock climbing is very similar to user research in a lot of ways. And I talked about the difference between bouldering and, gosh, what's the other one? Bouldering and rappelling, bouldering and there's rock climbing with ropes, and then there's rock climbing like without ropes, basically. And it was very analogous to my journey as an entrepreneur. And someone shared that post. He was both a rock climber and a researcher and really could relate to it. That would be like a terrifically unique, relevant story to share.
Everybody's writing free solo, belay, top rope climbing. There's a whole bunch of Rockies here. Since we're technically out of time, let me just do one more question, then we'll say goodbye. Purvi asks, how difficult is it to shift from a UX researcher of a non-tech product to a tech product UX researcher? Do I need a course for that shift?
I don't know if going from tech to non-tech is as important. Are you going from service design to product design? I would look for similarities in terms of transferable skills. So if you have your foundations already shored up, you know how to ask good questions, you know how to dig deeper, you can gather information reliably, consistently, and in a culturally relevant manner. I would think that there's a lot of transferable skills. And I would focus on that. If you're speaking with the same segment of people, the elderly or children or people who speak English, not non-native English speakers, I would look for ways to underscore your transferable skills. If you work in tech, it does help to know, about some basic tech, but whether or not you need a specific class for that, I mean, I think that's going to depend on the complexity of the software. Certainly, business to business is typically much more complex than business to consumer software. But again, like, what do you connect to? What are your values? What about this is attractive, to you? And I would really do some soul searching so that you can both target these roles more efficiently, but also to be prepared when that question is asked, during the interview process.
Great. We are past time. Thank you so much for staying and staying a little bit late. Michele, remind everybody where they can find you and some of the things you have coming up that they might want to join.
Terrific. Again, I'm on LinkedIn. My name is spelled Michele. Last name is Ronsen. R is in Robert, O is in Oliver, N is in Nancy, S is in Sam, E is in Eric, N is in Nancy. Next week on Tuesday, we're holding an is Ask Like a Pro Right for You with alumni event. You can go ahead and register for that on Eventbrite. And that's listed under Curiosity Tank. And don't forget the resources. I put together 23 resources for you to help you with your user research job interview process and preparation. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thanks for being here. We know we'll see you in a few weeks to talk about recruiting and the importance of choosing the right number of the right participants. And as soon as this stream ends, I'll get Michele's resources into the YouTube description so you can find those links there. But Michele, thanks again. Have a super day. Everybody, be well. We have an extra surprise show tomorrow where I'm going to be giving you some ammunition to deal with lovers of Agile. So come on back. And either way, I'll see everybody soon. Thanks again, Michele.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Customer centricity as business intelligence. Visit deltacx.com to learn why we are